Someone asked me to do a video on my tent of choice, and I was kind of holding off on that because I do plan to buy a new tent, a Durston X-Mid one-person solid, which could be months away. I'm on a list. But I have plenty of video and footage of my Hilleberg. I've had Hilleberg tents for 20 years and I love them. I'm not really even saying I'm replacing them. You know, the last time I tried it, I regretted it. Actually wrote a letter to Hilleberg and told them I'm sorry I went out on them. But I would like to lose this 9mm tent hoop pole that I carry. You know, it's only 6 ounces, and I've actually distributed that weight to my hiking storage pole now, and works very well, stores it very well. Someone actually asked me about keeping a fishing pole in here. Same thing, it would fit in there perfectly. And you have 2 poles if you're carrying double poles. If you make these things, again, I'll put a link below on how to do it yourself, make your own hiking poles with storage. But that is, my Hilleberg tents are so wind worthy. If you watch a lot of these videos, I watch a ton of them. They show people getting their tents, putting them up in the backyard, right off screen. They probably have pina coladas and it's a nice sunny day in California. Well, I always Google whatever tent I'm looking at and then put in wind or bad weather, because that's what I want to see. And if I get a Durston tent, I'm not going to put up a video of me putting it in the backyard having pina coladas. I'm waiting for a 50-mile-an-hour wind, and we'll see if that thing holds up. I've always liked the idea of a tent pole tent, but I've just seen so many of them fail on the trails. Where my Hilleberg is a bomb shelter, and I've never had a problem with it. Feel secure in it in any kind of weather. But you'll notice in this video, gear is changing all the time. My gear is changing constantly. Some of this footage was shot less than a year ago, and you'll notice I had a Z-Packs poncho that I used for a ground cloth. Worked out great, and it had 2 purposes, a ground cloth and a poncho. But I moved away from that and actually doubled the weight of my rain gear poncho because it didn't cover my arms. I want my arms and my legs covered, and that poncho just didn't do it. I sold it, and I've really gone back to my ground cloth of choice, which is 1443R soft Tyvek. I try everything, but I give it a good try, but I usually go back to what works best for me, and in that case, that works really good. My daughter says my videos are too long. I'm long-winded. This one, she said I should be half what I put out. This one is twice what I've usually put out, but I want you to know that this is not required viewing. You don't have to watch these things if you're not learning anything or not enjoying them. I just do it to keep myself out of trouble. And, in my early 70s, I have to say that I probably repeat myself a lot. And if you hear something I've said before, don't stop me, because I want to hear it again. I hope you enjoy these. Keep smiling. I'm not going for the Unabomber look. It's just what I wear now, especially in the desert. When you get into your early 70s, your face starts to fall off. So I wear long sleeves and a hood when it's not blowing like crazy. Anyway, today we're going to talk about tents. And even though I'll use my tent as the prop, I'm really not talking about the Hilleberg Enon. That's my perfect tent, but your perfect tent might be something totally different. It might be a hammock. It might be freestanding. It may weigh a pound less than mine. So I've been backpacking for 60 years. I've been through a lot. I think my first tent was canvas. I come from the age of canned goods and canvas. But when I did the CDT in '99, I used a bivy tent, which was basically, if you can believe it, still 4 pounds back then. Little hoop over the head, little hoop over the, even smaller hoop over the feet. It was like sleeping in a body bag. Roll out into the snow in the morning and get dressed. And I can't live like that anymore. So now I went to an octo. The next year I completed the Great Divide Trail. So where I left off in Glacier, I went to Jasper, and I bought a Hilleberg octo, which is the big brother of this Enon that I have today. And I used that thing until probably 15 years, and it's such a quality tent, I still sold it for half price, and bought the Enon, which was much lighter. The Enon for me right now, the way I use it, is 37 ounces, sil nylon. The fly comes all the way down to the ground. That's one thing I don't like about some of these lighter weight tents that I have almost pulled the trigger on. I mean, I'm impressed with the weight savings you can get from, say, a Z-Pax Ultiplex or a tarp tent, Notch Li. I like both those tents, but there's just things that won't work for me. You know, the Ultiplex, it's a single wall tent. I'm not into single wall tents. It's bigger volume, so it's not going to be as warm, not only because of the single wall, but the volume. I think it's got a ton of ventilation, but that doesn't help you when it's blowing sideways and it's cold. I like my double wall, small little cave, nice and warm. And this is a single hoop, easy to put up. If it's blowing sideways, I throw the hoop into the tent. It's not hooked onto the tent, it actually has a sleeve, and then I can peg out both ends. Boom, it's basically done. And then I put another 4 pegs in it, and I've been in some real blows with that thing. One thing you don't want to do is have to get up in the middle of the night and deal with a tent that's blown down or falling apart. That's the time you don't want to be having to deal with that. I've looked at hiking pole tents. You know, I could save a pound. That's a lot of weight, half a liter of water. But I'm just not sold on hiking pole tents in the wind. On the PCT, I spent a few nights with people in a windstorm that had hiking pole tents, and in the morning I'm the last guy standing. I just don't want to have to get up in the middle of the night and deal with that kind of stuff. One of the drawbacks of the sil nylon is it does get wet, it does stretch. All my tie outs have elastic cord on them for a couple of reasons. To kind of alleviate some of that stretching, and also I have these long cords so that I can peg it out and put a rock on top. So that peg's not going to go anywhere. And then the rock's really not wearing on my tent tie outs. I can change the elastic out anytime. And okay, so it gets wet, condensation, rain, whatever. The next day going up the trail, I stop for a snack. I pull it out, throw the hoop in, put 2 pegs in each end. By the time my snack's over, if we got any kind of sun, that thing's dry as a bone. So it's not a huge problem. Again, I like everything about Dyneema, except the fact that it doesn't seem to take abrasion very well. I do have a Z-Packs ground cloth, which is basically their poncho, which is like everything else they do, very innovative. I love this poncho. I've always been a poncho wearer. My poncho that I use for 25 years weighed a pound. So going to Dyneema again, it really dropped the weight, and the design was so much better. But I noticed just using it for a ground cloth, it's the same weight as their tents, floors. You see a lot of wear in it, and I mean, I backpack year round, and I have probably 100 nights on the thing already. I know they guarantee their tents for a through hike, but in my opinion, I want gear that's going to last several through hikes, and I've already proven that my Hilleberg tents do that. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. Another thing a lot of through hikers don't think about if they've never experienced one before is real estate. It's hard to come by. I mean, you know, I'm out here in the desert today, and if you follow the background of the trail here, it's not easy to find a wide enough spot to put up a tent. High country, the mountains, doesn't matter. You're in the great wide open, but you can go miles sometimes before you'll find some place that's decent to put up a tent, and the smaller the footprint, the more options you're gonna have. So when I almost bought a duplex once, but then I thought, boy, that thing takes up a lot of real estate. And even the Altiplex and the Notch Ally that I really like, they're much wider than, not much, but at least a foot wider than my tent, which makes a difference. The other thing is, a lot of times, especially out here in the desert, I want to put my tent up where nothing's rubbing against it, but sometimes that's not even possible. And you put up a Dyneema tent and something blows up against it all night long, it's gonna wear a hole in it real quick. So I love the idea, I love the innovation. I just can't seem to pull the trigger on a Dyneema tent, and I hate the colors. I would own an Altiplex today if Z-Packs wouldn't have cut out the camo just to try it, but I stealth camp too much to stick out like a sore thumb with the color tents that they have, and most of the other companies just have a silver material. I don't want to have to be careful with a tent or a backpack. I mean, I spend a lot of time out, and especially here in the desert, everything rips and pokes and sticks, and I've ruined a lot of gear. Nothing to do with the manufacturer. You buy good quality gear and you use it a lot, it's still going to have to be replaced and repaired. My Hilleberg, great customer service. I've sent that thing back, and they've done a tremendous job patching it up for me. And again, none of it was a manufacturing defect. One was a black bear. They're not bear proof. I'll go over that later. One was a pack rat or some kind of little rat. Never mind. Anyway, you'll camp in areas where things are going to chew on your lines, chew on your fabric. Somebody chewed my shoelaces last night and chewed a strap right off my backpack and chewed my tent. Have any ideas who that might have been? Yeah, I'm talking to you, Fuzzface. And, you know, they just have to be patched up, but I never worry about how I fold or roll my sill nylon. Like, you have to kind of take that in consideration with Dyneema. You know, it can be blowing sideways, and I get up and roll that thing up any way I can and get it in the sack and get moving. It's a very small footprint. I carry it on the side of my pack. So I wrap it, roll it, wrap my Dyneema poncho around it, put it in a stuff sack, cinch it to the side of my pack. And again, if it's wet or dirty in the morning, when the sun starts flying, I just put it up again. It takes a minute. Dry it out, move on. No big deal. And don't get me wrong, I'm not telling you not to buy a Dyneema tent, because I may end up doing that myself. I've come so close to pulling the trigger, and then I talk myself out of it. I mean, if Henry Shire at Tarp Tent or Z-Packs came up with a hoop tent, Hilleberg, especially Hilleberg, they came up with a hoop tent made out of Dyneema, I'd probably be the first one to buy one, just to give it a shot, see how long it lasts. You know, if I could get, you know, if I get a couple hundred nights out of it, I'd be a happy camper. But, you know, with the tent I have now, I probably have 500 nights in this Enon. And I could probably sell it for half price right now, and people would be fighting over it. It's still in great shape. So I said I carry my tent on the outside of my pack, and there's a reason for that. Another thing I like about a tent is that, unlike that bivy sack I did the CDT in, I can sit up in it, I can wrap up all my gear, get it all put into my pack. And when I step out of that tent, that's the only thing I have to deal with. And I don't want to put it in my pack, especially if it's wet. And so the last thing I do is take that tent down, wrap it in my Dyneema poncho, my Z-Packs poncho, stick it in the stuff sack, tie it on and move. If you're gonna plan on spending a lot of time in a tent, then I say bigger's better. But my mode of operation is pretty much on a through hike. I'm up at dark 30 and I hike till dark 30. And wherever I stop, hopefully there's enough real estate to put my tent up. And so I don't need a lot of room. I'm not spending a lot of time in that tent. I'm burning all the daylight I can. But in the winter like this, when I'm hiking in Texas, New Mexico, mostly Arizona, you know, it's dark early, light late, so I can spend as much as 12 hours in my tent, which kind of sucks. But again, I don't find it a huge problem. It's a sleeping chamber, basically. I just want to be warm, dry, comfortable. I'm not a fan of tarps. Not a fan of cowboy camping, even though a lot of people do it. Not only the weather, no protection from wind, ants. I can't tell you how many times I camp in a spot that's full of carpenter ants or fire ants in Florida. I want to be in a cocoon. I want it to be bug proof. I don't want any skeeters disturbing my sleep. And I don't want things crawling all over me. So a lot of people find a ground cloth not necessary, and hey, to each his own. But I like this Z-Pax poncho for my ground cloth. I've always used a ground cloth. I used to use 1443R, Tyvek, nice and soft, pretty light. But this poncho is even lighter, and of course has a double purpose. And the thing is, it's a floor for my vestibule where I leave a lot of my gear out in the vestibule at night. If it's wet, my tent bathtub floor is not all mud in the morning. All I have to do is deal with that poncho. And I just fold it in on itself on the dirt, wrap it around my tent, and during the day I'll pull it out and rinse it off if I come to a water source. And of course the Dyneema doesn't suck up any water, so it's easy to clean it and shake the water off of it. Some people like the double vestibule in like the duplex, notch LE, LI. Personally, in a solo tent, I can't think of when I would ever use a double vestibule. I do like the fact that the tarp tent notch LI does have zippers. As innovative as Z-Pax is, I think they're trying to hold the weight down by not adding zippers, but I've just dealt with too much wind in my life to trust Velcro to hold the chaos outside the tent. I want to be zipped in, nice and secure, go to sleep and not have to worry about waking up outside. So on the PCT just past I-80, the Peter Grubb ski hut, I went about a mile past that and camped for the night and had the food in my vestibule. Number one, it's in a Cuban fiber bag. It's vacuum sealed in plastic, most of it. Then it's stuffed into my pack. And on top of my pack are the smelliest clothes on the planet. But that's how good a bear's nose is. He knew that food was right there. And so he woke me up in the middle of the night. And when I rolled over, I was just face to face. It looked like I had a bear head hanging from the wall of my tent. So what he did, so there's a patch here I talked about that Hilleberg fixed. That was just like some pinholes. I'm assuming he hit that with his claws, but then he was pushing so hard on the tent here, he just ripped the zipper open. So he had his head stuck right in there. And of course I woke up and went, "Ah!" And he took off. I could hear wood, sticks, branches breaking as he ran at a full gallop out of there. And I wanted to chase him down and kick his butt because I thought he ruined my $600 tent, but I figured out that he had just split the zipper open, so I was able to zip it down, zip it back up, it was fine. Lasted me the rest of the trip. It was a little harder to, I don't know if he damaged the zipper, but I sent it back to Hilleberg to have these patches done. They repaired the zipper. All is good. So I sleep at this end. That way I can reach out of my, unzip and reach into my vestibule and get anything I want. If I'm going to have a condensation problem, most of it's going to be at this end on these two walls because I'm breathing on them all night long. And if it's windy, they will blow in right here and the inner tent will stick to the outer tent. It's not a huge problem, but to solve that, I did add some lines here which can really taut that right up and keep it from coming together. But again, I don't worry about it that much. I've never had a huge problem with it. If I've got condensation in the morning, I just wrap it up. As soon as the sun starts flying or I get some dry weather, I'll pop it up in 2 minutes, have a snack, let it dry out. It dries quick. Roll it back up, I'm on my way. It is not a problem. But I'll tell you, the difference between a single wall tent and a double wall tent is significant. I mean, on a cold night, even though it's just bug screen, I can open that door and reach out to get something and feel a huge temperature difference. So having that little inner tent cocoon, there's a difference. There's ample space between the inner and outer tent. Another thing about a hoop tent is the sleeve. A lot of freestanding tents, you put your inner tent up, then you put the fly on and you clip it on. But in a wind, I mean, I've had this thing pushed way over. Now there are guy lines that come out here, but I never use them. But that would even make this thing even more sturdy. But I've just never found the need for it. So I'll leave you today in a cholla forest in central Arizona, in a curve-billed thrasher's nursery full of little eggheads. Hiking a 100-mile section of the Arizona Trail this week. And if you've watched any of my videos before, you've seen me kind of do a review of my Hilleberg tent. In that segment, I was talking about comparing it to a DCF tent, which I'd never owned. So since that time, I pulled the trigger and bought one. And I thought it kind of checked all the boxes for me. My main goal was to save a pound. And I thought this was going to do it. It was really, I've watched hundreds of YouTube videos of people that had this tent. So I thought I knew all of its downsides. And it seemed to have more upsides. And it really had the same footprint as my Hilleberg Enon. And so I finally bought one. And I had it for 3 weeks and I sent it back. And I don't think the customer service person wasn't too happy with me, and might have even been the owner because it is a cottage industry manufacturer. And I felt bad. You know, I really wanted to like this tent, but I think just to keep the weight down on these things, just from all the videos I watched and what I actually was sent, they had really downsized some of the straps, some of the tie outs. What I got and what I saw in all those videos was not the same thing, but that wasn't the deal breaker. You know, I know a lot of people buy a tent by how much it weighs. And so these manufacturers are kind of under the gun to keep that weight down, that listed weight down. And this tent was supposed to set up with 4 stakes, which going in, I thought that's not going to happen. You know, I'm going to use probably 6 stakes from the videos I've watched. And I get into some real blows. I mean, I'm hiking all the time in all kinds of areas. And so, as I played with this thing more and more, I finally discovered that it was going to take 10 stakes to hold this into form, and staked out really well to take the wind. And so I took it down to the grasslands in the Patagonia area, and I got into some heavy wind, like 25-mile-an-hour winds with 35-mile-an-hour gust. When I say Patagonia, I mean Patagonia, Arizona. And so the other thing I knew going in on these tents is that they don't hug the ground. You know, this was a double wall tent too, but it still didn't hug the ground, and the only way to get it close to the ground is to lower the poles. And I thought, well, you know, I can do that. But when you lower the poles, the inside tent lowers too and gets kind of saggy. But again, it wasn't a deal breaker for me. But it had struts on the ends that would not stay together. And every video I watched, when people were setting it up, it looked like it's set up. And that would be the standard method of doing it. And the struts were out. But then I noticed a lot of people complaining about the struts not staying out. And thus, that's where the 10 stakes come in. Now you got to stake out each of those struts on both ends of the tent, another 4 stakes. And I tried it every which way. And when I called to turn the tent in, and they weren't happy with me, they said that, you know, I shouldn't be watching YouTubes, I should be calling them. Well, I'm calling, and the only advice they gave me was that you had to pull the ridge line down last, and that holds the struts out. So I'd set this thing up like 24 times, so what's a couple more? I tried it before I sent it back, and in the wind those struts would not stay in place, which then affected the inner tent. And you know, there was just too much fiddling. I think that's really what made me send the tent back, was just too much fiddling with these Dyneema tents that need to be staked out 10 times. For me, that just doesn't work. I just get into too many blows. Well, with my Hilleberg, I throw it up, I stake out 2 ends. It's pretty stable, and then I can go around and up. I'll put another 4 stakes in to pull it out. So I've got 6 stakes in that thing, and it's going nowhere. And it's really designed for another 2 stakes as outriggers on the hoop that goes through the center, which I've never used. But if I got into such a blow that I thought that was going to be necessary, I could just use my bare hanging rope to tie both those pole ends out. And I carry, I carry 2 extra stakes in my pole. I just shove them in here. You know, you take off the end, you got a gap here, and you got a gap up here. So I put a couple of groundhogs in those poles if I ever need them. Anyway, the other problem with not being close to the ground, and not really even if you drop the pole length, it didn't come that close to the ground. In the wind, in the grasslands even, I had dust in my tent. I had dust accumulate on my gear, and I've never had that with my Hilleberg. You know, it hugs the ground, and I've been in some real blows and some dust. It doesn't enter my tent. And so that was kind of a deal breaker for me too. Now that I've had time to play with the Dyneema hiking pole tent, the real pros for me for my Hilleberg are that hoop. So there's not a pole in the way. I don't have two vestibules. I've got more tent inside. I use a ground cloth. So trying to put a ground cloth under a hiking pole tent, you've got to fiddle with that. Too much fiddle factor. When I'm in a blow, I just want to throw that thing up. I don't want to spend a half hour trying to figure out how to get all the geometric angles right. So I can't really speak to how long Dyneema fabric is going to last, but I watch a lot of YouTubes, watched hours of YouTubes trying to figure out which tent to buy, and those that were a few years old, I noticed people were saying that they were leaking already. Well, that's another thing. I buy gear that lasts 20 years. I actually wrote Hilleberg a letter apologizing. I told him I went out on him. I said it must have been a midlife crisis, which I hope is true because I'm almost 73, and if this is midlife, perfect. But I told him I had a wandering eye, and if they hopefully will forgive me, I sent it back, and I won't cheat on them again. I love my Hilleberg tent. I also really, now maybe Dyneema relaxes after a while, but again, dealing with it in severe weather, I can roll my sill nylon tent up much smaller, much quicker, much more efficiently than trying to deal with that Dyneema. It's, I don't know, it's got some characteristics I really don't care for. But if it had saved me a pound, I probably would have kept it. But anyway, the weight savings that I thought I was gaining from a Dyneema tent slowly got whittled away by me having to add some line locks that they didn't put on it, probably so they can advertise a lower weight. I don't know. Pretty soon I wasn't saving a pound anymore, and I truly hated all the little fiddling I had to do to get that thing right and get it up. I don't want to spend a half hour putting my tent up. They said I could put this thing up in a minute. Well, I can put it up in a minute, but it's going to be cockeyed. It's going to blow down the first time the wind blows. And so you really have to work with it and fiddle with it to get it right. And I don't have to do that with my Hilleberg. Again, I stake it out at both ends. It's half done. And then I just put 4 more stakes out to widen the tent and stretch it so the fly and the inner tent stay taut. I use elastic line at the end of all my lines so that when it starts to sag, it does help some, not completely, but I've only had the problem with the inner tent and the outer tent. If I get a wet, windy night, they'll sandwich together. But I've had Hilleberg tents for 20 years, and I can say honestly, and I'm not talking about backpacking a couple times a year,
I'm talking about backpacking year-round. I've never had water hit me in the face like you would experience, say, with a single-wall tent or a double-wall tent that leaked. You know, I'll have moisture up there, especially where I'm breathing against the fabric all night. And in the morning, if it's been windy, it'll be pasted together, but I don't get water in the tent. So I know I've been in some hellacious blows, and I can sleep sound knowing that I'm not going to have to get up and reset my tent in the middle of the night. I'm not going to have to deal with water in my tent. Everything's going to be high and dry in the morning. I'm going to be able to pack up everything inside my tent. And when I climb out, all I have to do is roll up this sil nylon tent, stick it on the side of my pack, and move. So let me just say, to finish up here, if you're listening, Hilleberg, my relationship with that Dyneema tent was strictly getting to know each other. I put it up a couple of dozen times, but I did not sleep with that tent. Keep smiling.